What do you think happens when academic institutions start demonizing a group of people based on race? You then start getting prominent personalities, celebrities, demonizing people based on race, which leads to marketing campaigns which play into these politics, and ultimately politicians demonizing people based on race. Why? You will likely start to see racial violence. You will see race-based rioting and conflict. And this is where we're at right now. The left likes to claim that they're the ones who oppose the racism. That's not true, and I guess technically it's never been true because the Republicans who have fought back against slavery and Jim Crow, and so, you get the point. But the left today says it's the Republicans that are racist. Meanwhile, the left overwhelmingly pushes critical race theory, intersectionality, and leftist identitarianism, which is escalating to a point of literal riots over racial reasons, and now people being beaten simply for being white. We have the story. Amazon driver attacks 67-year-old woman during delivery dispute. Oh, a delivery dispute. What was that dispute? The driver told the woman to check her white privilege. She apparently said no. Now, there was probably some, words exchanged before this, so sure, delivery dispute. But you see, this is part of the problem. It's likely only going to get worse. And I would assume that this attack is a hate crime, right? I'm not a fan of hate crime legislation. I think the crime was the attack in the first place. But now you can see people are starting to be racially motivated in their attacks. And the problem is, would this individual have attacked this woman if they didn't harbor deep-seated racist values pushed by the left? I think the answer is probably not. No, seriously. I think the white privilege attacking someone based on their race escalates things. Now, of course, it was the left that has long said, if you allow people to engage in hate speech, it will lead to violence and everything. Yes. I mean, yeah, if people go around advocating for violence and being hateful, it very well could, which is why I'm not a big fan of hate crime laws, because the crime is the violence, and we don't want institutionalized violence. But you can't simply tell someone they're not allowed to have an opinion or express that opinion because you're concerned about potential ramifications. Now, my problem with this is they are institutionalizing racism. So by all means, I can say people should have a right to free speech, but that doesn't mean the government should be pushing things that are ideological and will eventually make things a whole lot worse. Admittedly, there is a very serious conundrum here. We know that if a society starts engaging in the normalization of racist behaviors, it probably will lead to violence against people based on race, which is why it must be a crime and it must be enforced that if you commit these crimes, you get shut down. And it's why everyone must have the value that if you're breaking the law, you will be arrested and you're allowed to engage in certain opinions, but that doesn't mean we should tolerate that in certain institutions. It should be like bigotry in general. Should not be allowed to be institutionalized. However, people should be allowed to have lectures. And I'll give you an example. There, first and foremost, I will add, and then we'll read the story. It's always a fine line, right? There's a gradient into what people are willing to accept. The left likes to say, aha, we got you because now you're admitting our point. It's like, no, I've always acknowledged hate speech is abhorrent, but it should be the crime and the violence. Take a look at what happens in these universities, which goes well beyond anything the right has tried defending. Psychiatrist describes fantasies of murdering white people in Yale lecture. Yale invited a person to come in who described their fantasies of killing people based on race. Yet Ann Coulter doesn't do that when they violently attack her. Ben Shapiro does not do that. There is a line. It's interesting. Tucker Carlson had someone on their show, on his show. And they were saying, you're in favor of banning speech because, look, would you allow someone to come on your show who was racist and say racist things? And Tucker said, no, you probably wouldn't. And that's true. So when we say we're defending free speech, we need to make sure we're defining what that exactly is. The problem is many conservatives just go full on free speech. Hey, that includes the anti-white hatred. There's a line. There are social norms. The issue is the left is engaging in overt racial discrimination. I'm not a fan of that. However, on the right, they have no institutional authority, and that's the bigger issue. Let's read the story, so otherwise I'm plathering on. Amazon driver attacks 67-year-old woman during delivery dispute. They say, a 21-year-old Amazon driver has been arrested after savagely attacking a 67-year-old customer Thursday following a dispute over a delivery in Castro Valley, California. The driver, Itzel Ramirez engaged in a heated verbal exchange with the unnamed victim before unleashing a horrific onslaught of punches to the back of the head and face of the much older woman. The vicious encounter was caught on video from multiple angles. Ramirez reportedly verbally berated the victim about her white privilege before the attack, according to KTVU Fox 2. Police say that the victim may have called the suspect a B word before the exchange turned into fisticuffs. And a bish, we'll say that. I don't know if YouTube cares, but the Alameda County Sheriff's Department said the victim suffered visible injuries and perhaps a broken nose. Quote, "It was frightening to see an Amazon driver do that. Somebody who we allow onto the property to provide us service," Doug Smith, the owner of the Vista Creek Apartments where the attack took place, told KRON 4. The landlord told reporters the victim is too shaken up to talk to the media about the incident. He said the fight began when the victim received an alert that an Amazon package she had been waiting for had arrived, but there was no package when she went to the lobby to find it. The woman questioned Ramirez standing in the lobby about the package when the verbal exchange quickly escalated into violent confrontation. Ramirez was arrested and is being held on $100,000 bail and will be arraigned Monday on 2 counts of elder abuse and battery involving serious injury. Quote, "This incident does not reflect the high standards we have for drivers who deliver our packages," Amazon said in a statement. "We take these matters seriously, and this individual is no longer delivering Amazon packages." This is what you get when you normalize this kind of rhetoric, these kinds of behavior at an institutional level. It's funny because this is what the left is arguing against. The only problem is they're the problem. When they talk about we can't allow a society to become racist or fascistic and all that stuff, I'm like, you are correct. But you defeat these ideas by challenging them in the open. So when this lady comes and lectures at Yale and says she fantasizes about murdering white people, I say, good. Now we can all see the insanity and psychosis these individuals are espousing. And you don't want to cover it up because then they say it in private and they spread this stuff. We want to name and shame all of this. So if somebody wants to get up and say disparaging things about any other race, be it black, Asian, Latino, or Mexican or whatever, let them say it. And then we can say those people are nasty and we don't want them around us. We don't want them on our shows. Look, they're allowed to have their opinions. If somebody wants to invite them to speak, they should be allowed to speak. And I think it's better because sunlight is the best disinfectant. Actually, that's a funny phrase because quite literally it's not. If you had something that was, infected surface, you don't just put it in the sun. You have to wipe it off. But you get the point. Letting these people speak, letting them speak publicly is probably a good thing. The problem is that privately in schools, they are spreading this insanity. Now, what do you think can happen to these kids when they grow up? We're taught in schools, or we were taught in schools, not to hate people, not to be racist, judge someone on the basis of their character, not the color of their skin. We learned that from Dr. King. Today, no, schools are actually saying the opposite. We have the story from The Federalist, from Jason Rance. Washington state mandates critical race theory in all public schools. While critical race theory training is pitched as a way to ensure equity in the classroom, in truth, it's far more sinister. Rance says, as several states move to ban toxic critical race theory from indoctrinating students, the state of Washington is leaning in. The race-obsessed framework isn't relegated to schools in Seattle, where you'd expect a victim-centered ideology like critical race theory to flourish. Thanks to the state's Democrat-controlled legislature, a trio of bills just signed into law mandates critical race theory training for all public school teachers. Another even requires training for medical students, teaching them it's essential to be a social justice activist as it is to treat patients. While the critical race theory mandates go into effect in the 2022-23 school year, many districts are already jumping on board. The Issaquah School District vows it will fight racism by identifying and removing bias and systemic and institutional barriers that create marginalization, while Bellingham Public Schools pushes training to guarantee inclusive education for students. At Seattle Public Schools, they've even developed a racial equity team, a group of far-left educators seeking that schools make all of their decisions through a racialized equity lens to effectively carry out this mission. They say staff needed training. Highline Public Schools, a majority minority district south of Seattle, has mandated similar training for years, even holding an annual race symposium where staff express their displeasure with being privileged and white. Quote, I felt like yesterday I realized that I'm white And I have all the advantages of being part of that group, one white staffer says. Privileges that I don't really think I fully understood until yesterday. I was reading White Fragility and I'm like, oh, okay. I think I'm taking the next step in my journey to understanding what's happening, what equity is about, what racial equity is about, what anti-racism is about, and what racism is about. That book, White Fragility, is written by an avowed racist who expresses her displeasure being around minorities. She literally says she is uncomfortable around black people. Why is that being used as some kind of guide for ending discrimination? Well, it's because they don't want to end discrimination. Anti-racism, as most of you know, is about making more. As Ibram X. Kendi said, the remedy for past discrimination is present discrimination and then future discrimination. In which case, they want people to be fighting each other based on race forever. I certainly don't want that. I want to be left alone, not judged based on who my family is. But it seems like the left is refusing to let this go. During hours-long sessions, staff learn race is a social construct that has been adapted to meet the needs of white supremacy culture. If you get defensive at being labeled a racist, facilitators say it's an example of white supremacy in action. I told this story about, when I was in Thailand during Chinese New Year, and I was standing in this shopping area and I noticed I could see over everyone's head. It was kind of a weird experience, to be honest, because I'm like 5'10", so I'm, basically average, right? Here in the US. In Thailand, in this massive crowded space with thousands of people, normally I'd expect to not be able to see anything else. I tried to stand up. No, there in Thailand, I was able to just see clear over everyone's head. It was kind of crazy. Why? Well, it's because there are differences in different regions and different people, and race is typically just a superficial descriptor for averages, I suppose. The left says race is a social construct. Okay, kind of. It is true that certain groups weren't considered dominant or weren't considered white in the past. And that's why the left says, see, that's what whiteness is. It's kind of meaningless, especially now when they claim that Slavic people aren't white. And it's like, dude, you guys are losing it. We don't base modern definitions off of definitions used 100 years ago. Otherwise, we'd all be talking very, very differently. So when you try to take 19th century linguistic and attach it to 21st century conversations in politics, things kind of don't make sense all that much. So now, white literally for most people just refers to people who are of, white European backgrounds. Race exists. There are exceptions to the rule, but when the left says that race is a social construct, they don't have a really good reason as to why that is. People in Southeast Asia are considered to be of Southeast Asian descent, and people who are Vietnamese are very different on average from people who are, say, Japanese. I guess the left can't really tell the difference, so they just say everyone is the same and race is a social construct. And then when it comes to medical practices, we take race and gender into account. Race and sex into account. Because different medications tend to have different reactions towards different people. Different people of different racial backgrounds might have different ailments. They're trying to deconstruct everything in a way that makes literally no sense. But anyway, I digress. The point was, it ultimately results in physical violence like we saw with the story. Take a look at this story. Suspect arrested after vicious attack on woman at Gardena gas station without provocation. A 300 to 350 pound black man exits his vehicle, walks up to a woman, and for no reason starts brutally beating this woman. Story went fairly viral. The point I made on Twitter, facetiously, I said, this man is just a victim of white supremacy. Why? It's something that's actually been said by many of these leftists, that when, someone who is black commits a crime, they make this racist statement that clearly the only reason that they would do something like that is because they were victims. No, it's because there's bad people of all different races. There are some pretty nasty white dudes, a lot of them actually, pretty nasty people of all different racial backgrounds, be it Asian, Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un. They ain't that great, right? And then you got, you guys don't like Joe Biden or you guys don't like Donald Trump. There you go. And then you've got Farrakhan. You've got people who are black. You've got people who are Latino. There's good and bad people. And some people think some ideas are better or worse. But we have seen crimes committed. And we have seen many of the woke say it's only because they're victims of white supremacy that they do things like this. And I'm like, no, sometimes people are bad people. That's why they do it. Well, now they teach this stuff to kids. They say the staffers learn black people cannot be racist because they don't have power, that whites benefit from white privilege even if they experience high poverty, and that virtually every American institution is founded in white supremacy. It's not. There are many institutions that are founded in white supremacy. That's true. So let me explain the name of the game. When I was a little kid, I remember coming home from school. My mom asks me, like, what did we learn? And I said, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. He discovered America. My mom said, no, he landed in the Bahamas. America's named for Amerigo Vespucci, and there were already people there. So didn't they discover the Americas? And I was like, oh, yeah, there were already people there, quite simply. Then we had, on top of that, it's like, well, and also Leif Erikson came to North America well before everybody else. Okay, fine. Well before every other European settler. So you realize that, and you're kind of like, hey, wait a minute. And I'm like, why are they telling me that Christopher Columbus discovered this place? Well, from a European colonial perspective, that makes sense. You see, that's true and obvious. Then they say, everything you know and love is racist because of that. It's like, no, actually, smart people figured out a long time ago that there are other historical perspectives, and it's probably very important that we ask Native Americans about their history to the best to the extent that it's written down and passed along, so that we can understand how people came to be in North America. Here's what the left does: they take one tiny thing. This is the con game. You take one tiny morsel and use that as to punch a hole that you can use to rip open the veil. They claim they're awakening people. It's a manipulation technique. You tell someone something that seems true and obvious, and then you tack on the things they can't confirm, or the things that will radicalize them and make them racists and violent and, just generally tear things down. It's the starting point. Find a morsel of truth. It's what the Chinese, I believe it was the Vietnamese or the Chinese, I think it was the Chinese, what they would do when they had POWs back in, what was this? Was it Vietnamese? I can't remember. I think it was China in the conflict with Vietnam and all that. They would take American soldiers and ask them to say something simple like, America is not perfect. Now, come on. Some people think America is perfect, but most people, even the people who love it, will recognize it has faults. We're not absolutists. They would say, if you want to eat, you must admit your country is not perfect. And they would say, well, of course, that's no big deal. We know America's not perfect. And they would say it. Then the next time they would say, now we want you to say something that okay, so now that you've said that, if you want to eat again, tell us why it's not perfect. What is America? What is one of their faults? And then someone would be like, oh, we had slavery, right? That wasn't bad. That wasn't that great. Over time, they would, one step at a time, get someone to say more and more bad things, these POWs, until eventually the person was saying outright, just like abhorrent things about the country, about the U.S. And they were like, what's the big deal, right? I already said the other thing. I'm only saying a little bit more. That's how they get you. They come to you with a simple truth. America had in its infancy. I mean, if you look at the Declaration of Independence, they literally talk about Native Americans and call them a disparaging term. So yes, there very much was racism in this country. I mean, come on, slavery literally existed until the Civil War ended it. But that's kind of the point. They get you to start by thinking about slavery and say, see, this country was founded on bad things. And then you counter with, yeah, and then a bunch of people fought and died to end it and won, right? So the country may have been founded on bad things, but isn't that a hard course correction? Don't you get to take credit for when good things happen? Now they're saying we must end racism in this country. It's resulting in chaos, violence, extremism. And my response is, if we had the civil rights movement, we made those changes. If we had the Civil War, we made those changes. You want more and more and more. The point is, no matter what happens, they keep saying it's never been fixed. They say that, these institutions were made while slavery existed, therefore the institution is bad. And it's like, no, we got rid of slavery. The institutions actually helped make that possible. And the people who fought and died made it possible. You say, yeah, well, then there was racism and there was Jim Crow. And it's like, and then we fought again and won every step of the way. This is the racist revenge. They're trying to bring back all of the ultra racist stuff. They're starting with segregation, and it's working. And they're getting lefties, liberals on board through this manipulation technique. It manifests in really dark ways, and it may result in something worse than a psychiatrist just fantasizing about murdering people. Eventually, it turns into actual physical violence, which we've seen. Eventually, it turns into race conflict and race war. And that's what I fear. This person comes out and says this, and other people just pile on and keep agreeing. So I'll mention this like I've mentioned it before. You see the photo of people in Nazi Germany doing the salute, and many people ask, how could it have gotten to that point? Today, a Yale lecturer was talking about their fantasies of just murdering random white people. An Amazon driver, an Amazon delivery person, brutally beats an elderly woman ranting about white privilege. Now people are marching through the street by the thousands, performing the red salute, which was at the start of the 19th century when the communists and the fascists were fighting. Each had a salute. The communists had the red salute and the fascists had the Roman salute, or I should say the Nazis, and they fought. And the communists lost, but not in Russia, where they won, and it spread to China. These extremist authoritarians are still pushing. And now in the U.S., people are marching around performing the red salute. And it's the classical liberals, those who believe in America, the libertarians, who are pushing back. So how did we get to this point? One step at a time, through one lie after another. And then people who just want to fit in will march around doing the red salute. People will look back, assuming we're victorious in stopping these extremists, and they'll see the photo of all of these people marching in the street performing the red salute, and they'll say, how did America get to that point? Think about that. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. at youtube.com/Timcast. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.